GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV,
on radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices.
With honest and civilised conversation.
We're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, in that the left fights the right and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was in fact a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah.
We're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hi there, welcome to Brazier. Some fast-paced news from 4 until 6. In the next hour, disruption across Britain today as passengers bear the brunt of the biggest rail strike in 30 years. Millions of commuters were left unable to catch a train with just 20% of services running after staff walked out in a dispute over pay and working conditions. I'll be joined by the former Transport Minister, Norman Baker. We'll find out the impact it's had around the country on you and yours.
On buses since about 6:30. They keep cancelling, keep driving past. It's impossible to get on them. They're all so packed. I've only literally just gotten to work now.
Also this hour, high praise for Britain and its response to the invasion of Ukraine. The former US ambassador to the UN and former US National Security Advisor John Bolton says the UK has taken a stronger stance on Russia than the United States and that Brexit has allowed Britain to play a more powerful role within NATO. Reaction from a former British Army officer. And at a cabinet meeting this morning, the Prime Minister set out why he believes the rail strikes are, in his view, wrong and unnecessary. Boris Johnson also suggesting unions are harming the very people they claim to be helping. We will ask, are unions a force for good? With me for the next 2 hours, the former advisor to Boris Johnson, Tim Montgomery. But first, the latest news headlines.
Thanks, Colin. Good afternoon. It's 2 minutes past 4. I'm Bethany Elsey in the GB newsroom. Travel chaos for passengers across the United Kingdom as rail unions hold the largest strike action in nearly 3 decades. With 80% of train services cancelled, Boris Johnson warned commuters they must stay the course in the face of what he's calling unnecessary aggravation. More walkouts are planned for Thursday and Saturday, but the knock-on effects will be felt all week. It's after last-minute talks failed to resolve a dispute between unions and rail bosses over pay, jobs and conditions.
We need the union barons to sit down with Network Rail and the train companies and get on with it. And we need, I'm afraid, everybody, and I say this to the country as a whole, we need to get ready to stay the course.
The RMT Union General Secretary Mick Lynch says members will overcome whatever obstacles the government puts in their way.
This is a lawful dispute under the legislation that the Tories brought in themselves. And every time we meet the hurdles and break the thresholds that they brought in, they want to change the law again. We've got the most draconian laws in Western Europe and in any democracy, in fact, anti-trade union laws. Whatever they bring in, we'll meet that challenge and we'll continue to campaign. And if necessary, we'll take effective industrial action when we need to.
Well, people who need to travel today say they've been struggling with alternatives.
It's taken me the best part of 3 hours using 4 buses and a little bit of walking.
I haven't been able to get any trains to work. I've been on buses since about 6:30. They keep cancelling, keep driving past. It's impossible to get on them. They're all so packed. I've only literally just gotten to work now.
I want to use buses, but the queues for the buses are just way too much, yeah.
Well, some unions have reacted with fury over a leaked memo which suggests Labour has banned its frontbenchers from picket lines. But the Scottish Labour leader, Anna Sarwar, has met workers striking on the picket line in Edinburgh and tweeted of his solidarity with them. Meanwhile, Royal Mail says it will ballot more than 115,000 of its workers over potential industrial action. The Communication Workers Union is demanding an inflation-based pay increase. The union described the 2% pay offer as totally inadequate. Ballot papers will be sent out to members next week and results will be released next month. In other news, a man who murdered a couple in their home while they slept upstairs have been jailed for life with a minimum term of 38 years. Stephen and Jennifer Chappell were both stabbed 6 times in November last year in Norton Fitzwarren near Taunton. Colin Reeves, who served in Afghanistan, launched the attack after a long-running dispute over parking. He killed the couple using a ceremonial dagger which was given to him when he left the army. A fire in a residential high-rise building in West London is thought to have been started by someone charging an electric scooter in their flat. One person was taken to hospital suffering from smoke inhalation. 30 residents were evacuated from the building, and those who weren't directly affected were advised to stay in their flats. While this resident says she had to alert her neighbours about what was happening herself.
In my flat, I saw that there was falling debris of flames, not flames, just debris. And then I looked down and saw all the fire brigade, but nobody called us. We had to go knocking to all the neighbours to call them out because we wasn't made aware of it.
An inquiry has found a Belfast hospital trust failed to intervene in the practice of a doctor whose work led to Northern Ireland's largest ever recall of patients. More than 4,000 patients who were seen by neurologist Dr. Michael Watt were invited to have their cases re-examined in 2018. A fifth of those were found to have been given an insecure diagnosis. The inquiry said patient safety was failed and made 76 recommendations to improve. And crowds have returned to Stonehenge to mark the summer solstice for the first time in 2 years. The sun rose over the stones at around 10 to 5 this morning and won't set until almost 9:30 this evening, giving more than 16 and a half hours of daylight. The summer solstice has been celebrated at Stonehenge for thousands of years, with the stones framing the sun as it rises. This is GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens. Now, though, let's get back to Colin.
Well, we're done with the graphics. Let's tell you about the story. Britain's rail network is facing widespread disruption today as members of the National Union of Rail, Maritime and Transport Workers walked out in this dispute over pay and proposed changes to the way they work. Around about 20% of services have been running, with around 50,000 union members, we're not sure of an exact number, demanding an 11% pay rise. Well, shortly I'll speak to former Transport Minister Norman Baker. First, let's bring you up to speed, if that's the right phrase, on the first of 3 days of strike action, which could be the start of months of, wait for this phrase, travel misery. Meanwhile, by the way, 16 Labour MPs defied orders from Keir Starmer by joining picket lines. Kate Osborne, the MP for Jarrow, and an aide to Keir Starmer's frontbench team, posted her support on Twitter. And strikers in Yorkshire, they were joined by former National Miners' Union boss, Arthur Scargill. Nobody under 45 really gets significance of that name. We do. Deputy Leader, Labour Leader that is, Angela Rayner, also backed the strikes, saying workers have been left with no choice. Further rail strikes planned later this week, with workers expected to walk out on Thursday and Saturday as well. The dates are sort of meaningless because the days in between are likely to be up the spout too. And members of the ASLEF union will strike on trains in Hull on Sunday as well. ASLEF has also announced more strikes in areas of London, with Croydon Tramlink staff planning to walk out later this month and in July. And wait for it, the Transport Salaried Staffs Association is balloting workers at Network Rail and other train companies over work and pay conditions. So strikes could effectively extend into July as well. Joining me now, GB News reporters Will Hollis, who's live from Nottingham train station, and Ellie Costello, who's at Victoria bus station in London. And Ellie, there's been this double whammy for people, commuters in London, not just the train overland strike, but the underground too.
Yes, double strike action today, Colin, on the tubes and on the trains. And that's why I'm outside Victoria coach station today, because if you want to get out of London on public transport, really the only way to do so is to get the coach or a bus. And you might be able to catch a glimpse of some of the buses as they go around the corner behind me. They are packed full. And I did take a walk through Victoria coach station many times throughout today. It is chaos in there. Many tourists very, very confused, obviously coming to London, not realising that there would be industrial action this week. They are now frantically trying to change their plans. So very busy and chaotic scenes inside the coach station. Outside, I've been speaking to people about how the strike action has affected them today.
On buses since about 6:30. They keep cancelling, keep driving past. It's impossible to get on them. They're all so packed. I've only literally just gotten to work now. They have a right to do it, but I don't think it should impact everyone else trying to get to work. I think there's got to be other ways to go about it. 100%.
I'm just relying on taxis and buses to get me around until my coach departs. So hopefully I'll find something to do. Lots to do.
The journey's been fine because I looked at the timetable, and although the trains are running hourly instead of half hourly, I've chosen the time to arrive, and it's been absolutely on time.
Well, Colin, the roads in London have been really busy. Many people forced into their cars today, which they wouldn't usually do on their morning commute. I saw many people actually taking part in car shares this morning, obviously prepared for that strike action this week. TomTom data says that the congestion level on London roads was 98% today, which basically means that if a journey usually takes 1 hour, it was taking almost 2. And I'm just going to get cameraman Pibbs just to take you around to this bus stop. You can start to see the queues already forming. That's what we were seeing this morning. People have been advised to complete their journeys by 6:30 p.m. And you can see that the queues are already forming for people to get on those buses home. But Colin, there are two people who are doing well out of this. It is the hotels in London. Many people have decided to stay here for the week, and also the black cabs. They're doing very well out of this strike action.
Ellie, thanks very much indeed. As I say, Will Hollis is live from Nottingham train station. Will, how busy there?
Yeah, well, we're in this bit of a sweet spot right now at Colin Brazier, where we're ahead of rush hour, but the sun is out, so you can imagine that there are a lot more people moving around this train station than you would expect if it was a little bit colder and maybe the sun wasn't out. There are still people going in and out of Nottingham train station, although from my experience it seems much fewer than would be usually. You can see that there's an RMT picket in the background as well. Now, why there are still people moving in and out of this train station? Of course, Nottingham is one of the, if not the biggest city in this region of the East Midlands Rail, which runs the trains in and out of this part of the country. They're running one every hour for those big destinations like Nottingham, like Leicester, like Derby as well. They've got one running every single hour to London, so you can see that there are still trains running. But if we were in different parts of Nottinghamshire, in maybe those smaller towns or in those smaller villages where only one train might run a day, then you aren't going to see any trains because they are all essentially scrapped. Now, East Midlands Rail, the managing director, said yesterday that it's the wrong decision for the railway communities to be it's the wrong decision to be striking for the railway and the communities that East Midlands Rail serves. But just a reminder of what Mick Lynch, the RMT Director General, has been saying is that there was no choice but to defend our members industrially to stop this race to the bottom. So over the next hour, we are probably going to see people coming and going, but in no way the same volumes that we would see on any other day here in Nottingham.
Costello, thanks both very much indeed. Well, away from the direct impact on commuters, there is something of a political storm potentially brewing. There's a memo from the Labour leadership, the Office of the Leadership, which has been leaked in the run-up to today's strike. It showed that senior party MPs were told they ought not to be on picket lines. Many members of the parliamentary party, or some members of the parliamentary party, it's probably fair to say, defied the instructions, have been pictured on protests with RMT members. The leader of the Scottish Labour Party, for instance, Anna Sarwar, tweeted, "The workers don't want strikes, the unions don't want strikes, the public don't want strikes, they demand better." Diane Abbott, Shadow Home Secretary under Jeremy Corbyn, tweeted, "On the RMT union picket line at the Seven Sisters depot, but don't tell Keir Starmer." Too late, Diane. Ian Lavery, the MP for Wansbeck and former chair of the Labour Party, joined a picket in Morpeth, tweeting solidarity with the RMT union today and all days. Beth Winter, Labour MP for Cunnan Valley, tweeted complete solidarity with striking RMT union members today. Well, earlier GB News' national reporter Paul Hawkins spoke to the Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan. The Mayor said it didn't matter whether Labour members joined picket lines because the party wasn't in power.
Labour are not the government, right? So the Labour Party going on a picket line or not makes not a jot of difference on these strikes today. These strikes today are happening because the government are not willing to, meet with the RMT nationally, but also are attaching a huge amount of conditions leading to cuts in London and across the country. So what the government's trying to do is, deflect and blame Labour. It's a red herring. The key thing is for, the RMT to sit down with the government, the train companies, Network Rail, and resolve differences around a table rather than strikes. Nobody wants strikes. I don't want strikes. Londoners don't want strikes. And I'm speaking to workers, they don't want strikes either.
That was the Mayor of London talking to us earlier. The former Transport Minister, Norman Baker, is here in the studio, flanked by Tim Montgomery, who you probably didn't see because we couldn't get the cameras to work earlier. So thanks to you for you both being here. Norman, let's imagine you're still in office. Do you ignore those people who say this isn't just between the Network Rail and the union? The government have a key role here to sort this out. Or would you be looking to get involved?
I think you have to dial down the rhetoric is the first thing I would say. That it's not helpful for people in government to start talking about union barons and bashing the unions, but nor is it helpful for people in the RMT to talk about general strikes, and also the strike is premature. It needn't have happened at this point in time. Look, and as far as getting involved is concerned, the government should be open about it. It's quite clear the Treasury is to some extent pulling the strings behind the scenes in terms of the offer, and in a way so they should. This is public money we're talking about, and the government has put in £16 billion over recent times, £600 for every family, as Grant Shapps has correctly said. So, of course, the government's involved. It's silly to pretend they aren't involved. But actually, in terms of the nitty-gritty of the dispute, it is about the conditions, the working conditions, the outdated practices, frankly, which are there, and the need for the people on the railway to have a decent wage. So, of course, the detail has to be Network Rail and the trade unions, but ultimately there is a backstop from the government in terms of what they can afford. But I would just say to both sides, dial down the rhetoric. I don't want a repeat of the 1970s. Neither do rail passengers. We want to get the trains back to normal as soon as possible. There is a deal to be done. That deal is let's modernise the railway and cut out ridiculous ancient practices. If that is done, then it's only fair, in my view, that the money that's released from that should go towards a better pay deal for the workers. That's the deal.
It's always interesting, Tim, when you get disputes like this, that people then get to look at how things really work. I mean, some of those practices that Norman Baker hints at there, we were talking about them yesterday with Simon Calder, travel editor of The Independent, and he was listing them, things like an unwillingness to let trains, rather than actual rail workers in high-vis jackets, walk down the lines to test that they're working fine, rather than letting the trains take lots of pictures and use drones. And, of course, one of the consequences of railway workers actually walking the lines is they get killed sometimes. So it's not just sclerotic, it's actually dangerous.
Yeah. And, of course, the reason why I agree just about with everything Norman just said, and, of course, one of the reasons why these practices continue is that a lot of, even since privatisation, the monopolies still have regional or local monopolies, and they feel they have the power to bring the network to a halt if they want to. I think the interesting thing, you know, I walked here, I've stayed here all week. My home is in Salisbury. I decided to stay in London, staying with friends, and I've been walking around London just to get through the tube strike. And it's interesting. I think the bus queues are certainly big, but I think a lot of people have stayed at home. The shops are very quiet. Talked to a few traders, and I think what the rail unions might be about to discover is that post-lockdown, people are more prepared for events like this than they have been in the past, and so the impact of this strike action, clearly disruptive, particularly for blue-collar workers who can't choose to stay at home, but for a lot of others, the impact on the economy might not be as great as they once thought, and I'm afraid the sad consequence of that is that public transport will suffer more than, you know, anything else.
Norman Baker, that point about blue-collar workers, Tim and I were talking when we were seeing pictures earlier of people queuing up for the buses, and he mentions there the buses are full of cleaners and shop workers.
Yes.
They're not full of the highly networked, credentialed corporate types who are just working from home.
Yes, well, including me this morning, actually, because I got on a bus, 2 buses to get to the office. So but to me, no, seriously, I mean, there are people who have to go to work by bus or get to work somehow. And also there are students who have got exams they've got to take. There are others who need to go there. I'm not sure you need to go to an Elton John concert, but there are people who want to travel into London to go somewhere. And, you know, we don't want to see public transport driven down. We want to see public transport used. And this doesn't bring confidence to the system. And the fact is, as you quite rightly say, actually, you know, rail travel is more optional than it used to be. If you look at what's happened since COVID, leisure journeys are now above where they were pre-COVID, actually. They're doing very well, which is why we need to get changes to the system, by the way, so the RMT cannot pretend Saturdays and Sundays are like they were in 1954. They aren't anymore. They are big days. But if rail travel's optional, then the rail just has to behave like a business and attract people onto the rail. There is no captive commuter market as there was even 10 years ago. It's gone.
Norman, has Mick Lynch got it? I mean, not Simon Calder, actually, it was the other travel editor, Christian Woolmar, was on yesterday, and he said 650,000 workers used to work on the railways, you know, into war years. A massive employer. And there we saw Arthur Scargill today on the picket line in Wakefield. I mean, you know, it reminds us, doesn't it, that there were union bosses who really felt, with some justification, the rail workers of yore, the mine workers not so very long ago, that they could bring down the country.
Well, I don't want to sound like a right-wing person, because I'm a Lib Dem, but let's just observe the fact that Arthur Scargill started with a huge union in a small house and finished with a huge house in a small union.
You are sounding very conservative.
I'm in favour of unions, but unions have to, you know, like anybody else, behave in the reality we're in now.
Totally. Norman Baker, appreciate you coming in by bus.
By bus.
Thanks very much. Let's turn to a rail expert, another rail expert from the Institute of Economic Affairs, Len Shackleton. Len Shackleton, welcome to you. We appreciate your time. What have you? We were told yesterday to look out for the numbers to see how many rail workers were willing to strike. I haven't seen any indication yet, a definitive number or proportion that suggests it's having more success as strike action than was expected, or less success. What's your sense?
Well, I get the feeling that perhaps more people are working than had been expected. There are quite a lot of trains running, but obviously this is still a massively disruptive event, and there's no getting away from that, basically.
In terms of how the government are playing it, they're trying to absent themselves from any actual active negotiations. Is that the right tactic, you think?
Well, I think the government is being a bit disingenuous about this. The train operating companies now are nothing at all. They have no autonomy. They're working on management contracts. They can't vary prices. They can't vary services. They can't market the programmes, the services they're offering, and so forth. They're completely a creature of the DfT. And we of course, have had this massive delay in getting Great British Railways organised. We still know very little about what it's going to do, who's going to run it, what the mechanisms are, how much autonomy it will have, and so forth. And until the government kind of sort this out, we're really messing around in the dark.
Future of the railways, Len. I mean, I was mentioning before, a couple of minutes ago, 650,000 railway workers used to be there running the railways in this country. It's a much smaller number now. But it's not been a story of endless decline. I mean, the numbers of people using the railways has gone up in recent years. I mean, so has the population of the country by about 10 million, so it would do, wouldn't it? But there have been improvements. But when you look at the alternatives, whether that's virtually or in time, a couple of decades hence, driverless cars, you'd expect the unions to be looking at the reforms and thinking, there's our future.
Yes, well, there are technical possibilities of driverless trains, of course. This has been known for a long time, and some countries, Denmark, for example, is planning to make all the sort of suburban services going into Copenhagen driverless over the next few years, and that will be a very interesting model. Clearly, there are all sorts of technical changes which need to come about, and you've also mentioned, of course, the way in which the market has shifted. Whichever way you cut it, revenue is significantly down, probably about 20% down, and it's not going to come back very easily. But more importantly, you've got this shift from the regular commuter services, which were the big elements of revenue, of course, prior to the pandemic, but the shift to weekends and leisure travel. And weekends, of course, I use the railways a lot of weekends, and for a long time, you've had all the maintenance work being done at weekends, rail replacement buses and all this kind of stuff, and no catering services at the weekend on the trains and so forth. That's going to have to change, and this means new shifts, it means new routes and so on. So it's not just technology, it's about shifting demand as well, which the railways have to adapt to.
And we'll see if they do. Len Shackleton of the IEA, appreciate your time. Thanks very much indeed. Let me do something to Tim Montgomery he won't like very much, which is to boil this down to 10 seconds, because it's complicated. It's complicated. But this is going to go on for days, if not weeks, and possibly months. So day one, we're halfway through it. Who's winning?
The public, by being flexible.
Thanks very much indeed.
That was under 5
That really was fantastic. You stumped me. You're with Colin Brazier. This is GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. Coming up, the former US ambassador to the UN has praised the UK for leading the way in helping to assist Ukraine against Russia. John Bolton says Brexit has helped the UK ditch what he called the smoothie decision-making process. We'll explore that story next with a former senior British Army officer. Back in a moment.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio. On digital.
Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices.
With honest and civilised conversation.
We're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
And the national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here. You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, in that the left fights the right and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was in fact a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah.
We're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
As you'd expect, loads of you have been getting in touch today with your thoughts on the rail strike. Some of those thoughts are almost printable. Let's take you through some of those that were. The Labour MPs backing the strike are at least being honest, but the rest are not, says one of our correspondents, just as many of them are not honest about their support for open borders. I think that was that was Tim who said that. Jeff says, I'm not happy in my job. I don't like the way my shifts have changed, and I'm not paid enough. I'm chucking it in and getting another job. Simples. Darren says, planes, trains and automobiles are Conservative disaster. John says the unions, of course, were needed 100 years ago, but nowadays they are simply the bullies in the playground and the rest of us are the bullied. The government should act like responsible teachers and expel the bullies. Keep them coming in. We'll try and share them, at least once we've been through them. Now, the former US ambassador to the UN says Brexit has helped the UK ditch what he called the smoothie decision-making process of the EU and led the way in supporting Ukraine following the Russian invasion. This is John Bolton, who was also Donald Trump's national security advisor until Mr. Trump sacked him, of course. And he was speaking at the launch of a report on Britain's role in the world after Brexit. He also claimed the UK has taken a stronger and more effective view than the United States. Joined by Hamish de Bretton-Gordon, former British Army colonel and a senior Ministry of Defence advisor. Hamish, welcome to you. Do you think it's unquestionably true that Britain has a bit more latitude now? We are free of the Brussels yoke.
I think absolutely. In times of war, you've got to act decisively, and politicians don't like making quick decisions, and particularly within an EU framework where you've got to get 26 or so other nations to agree. That is very difficult. And whatever criticism Boris gets at the moment, his decisiveness at the very beginning of this conflict when the Russians invade is probably the difference between Ukraine being overrun in a few days, which Putin thought was going to happen, and to a position we're in now where there is a chance that we can push the Russians back to the border. And it is also having a war-fighting mentality. You know, some of the European countries were so reliant on Russian gas and oil, it took them a long time to make a decision to realize that if we don't push the Russians back, you know, Ukraine might not be where they stopped. So, yeah, I think this is a positive thing out of Brexit that we have been able to take the lead. We've been able to support the Ukrainian government. And certainly in my discussions with the Ukrainian government and people like the Ukrainian ambassador in London, they will reiterate what John Bolton said, that the UK is the staunchest and in the early stages, the most important ally that allowed them to fight back and hold the Russians and hopefully now push them back to the borders from February of this year.
And it's interesting you make the point, it was those critical early days, because in a sense that's when all the action, the strategic action was happening. It's when the big gains or losses were made. And that's when, if anybody needed some iron in their soul, that's when it was needed most.
Absolutely. That has been the key thing, the fact that we could react, because Putin gambled that we wouldn't do anything. Let's face it, when we didn't react in Syria, when they used chemical weapons over a number of years, that really emboldened Putin. And he thought the West were just going to sit back and let him carry on and take Ukraine. But luckily, people in this country, and I'm sure the security and the military advising Boris Johnson and the government, made him understand that we could not allow the Russians to overrun Ukraine, quite apart from, the very brave people there who are trying to defend it. Because if we'd done that, they would, have a very big foothold. And it was only last week that President Putin said he saw himself as the modern day Peter the Great, who some will remember conquered Europe back in the day. And that is certain that decisive early action by the British government, now being supported by the Europeans and giving vital weaponry that is required to push the Russians back. But that early activity by the British government, I think, was crucial. And I think Zelensky and the other Ukraine senior military and political advisors would absolutely underwrite that. But we must see it through to the end. Quite frankly, everything else we've been hearing about rail strikes and the cost of living crisis, has in effect been caused by Ukraine. If we don't prevail in Ukraine, the rest of it is almost irrelevant.
Hey, Mr. Bretton Gordon, appreciate your time as ever. Thanks very much indeed. Tim Montgomery alongside me today. Tim, John Bolton's approving of Britain's newfound freedoms. What do you think?
No, I agree with John Bolton on most things, and this is not an exception. But I'd like to pay particular credit, actually, to the Defence Secretary, Ben Wallace. Boris Johnson rightly gets a lot of praise for this. But what Ben Wallace did, our Defence Secretary, he actually read Putin's speeches. And he went to the Prime Minister and said, a little bit like with Hitler and Mein Kampf, Hitler laid out in Mein Kampf quite what he thought of the Jewish people. And what Putin said was he was going to invade Ukraine. And Ben Wallace said, this man is serious. We've ignored previous things he said he will do, and he did them. And it was that, really, and Prime Minister, to his credit, listened to Ben Wallace, but that's why Britain was so first, so earnest in supporting Ukraine. And I'm quite critical of this Prime Minister, as you know, Colin, but on this, he's been absolutely right.
Tim, no, thanks very much indeed. Coming up at a Cabinet meeting this morning, just talking about the Prime Minister, well, he set out why he believes the rail strikes are, in his view, wrong and unnecessary. Boris Johnson also suggesting the unions are harming the very people they claim to be helping. We'll be asking, are trades unions a force for good? First, the latest news headlines with Beth.
Thanks, Colin. Good afternoon. It's almost 4:35. I am Bethany Elsey in the GB newsroom. Major travel disruption for passengers across the UK as rail unions hold the largest strike action in nearly 3 decades. With 80% of train services cancelled, Boris Johnson warned commuters they must stay the course in the face of what he's calling unnecessary aggravation. More walkouts are planned for Thursday and Saturday, but the knock-on effects will be felt all week. It's after last-minute talks failed to resolve the dispute between unions and rail bosses over pay, jobs and conditions. Around 100 firefighters are tackling a blaze at a high-rise block of flats in Manor Park in East London. London Fire Brigade says a flat on the 13th floor of the 15-storey tower block is alight. Around 60 people left the building before crew arrived. The cause of the fire isn't yet known. A man who murdered Stephen and Jennifer Chappell in their home while their children slept upstairs has been jailed for life with a minimum term of 38 years. Colin Reeves, who served in Afghanistan, launched the attack in Norton Fitzwarren near Taunton last November. It followed a long-running dispute over parking. An inquiry has found Belfast Hospital Trust failed to intervene in the practice of a doctor whose work led to Northern Ireland's largest ever recall of patients. More than 4,000 patients who were seen by neurologist Dr. Michael Watt were invited to have their cases re-examined in 2018. The inquiry found a fifth of those were given an insecure diagnosis. On TV, online and DAB plus radio, this is GB News. I'll get back to Colin in just a moment.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
Here's today's markets as they stand. The pound is 1.228 to the dollar, the pound is 1.163 to the euro, and the price of gold currently stands at £1,497.47 per ounce.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV,
on radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere. We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices.
With honest and civilised conversation.
We're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you. And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
And the national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here. You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Defence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, in that the left fights the right and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was in fact a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah.
We're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Defence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Well, now, on a couple of occasions in the 1990s, I took a tape recorder to the West Yorkshire home of Anne Cryer. Anne, who's now 82, was then the Labour MP for the Pennine Mill town of Keighley. She was also a voice in the wilderness. It didn't matter that what she said was based on fact, on what her constituents were telling her was really happening on the ground, because Anne, 25 years ago, was saying something that was simply not ready to be heard. She was the first public figure to consistently draw attention to the actions of grooming gangs, predominantly made up of men of Pakistani heritage. By drawing attention to the plight of young women, Anne was denounced as a racist troublemaker. She was ostracised by other backbenchers, but she was made of stern stuff. She'd only recently survived a car crash which claimed the life of her late husband, the left-wing Eurosceptic Bradford MP, Bob Cryer. Well, to an astonishing and, frankly, I think depressing extent that we know anything about the grooming gangs is down to a handful of courageous individuals. Anne Cryer is one. The former Rochdale detective, Maggie Oliver, is another. And a reporter who joined the Yorkshire Post just after I left the paper, Andrew Norfolk, who wrote a series of articles for the Times newspaper, which blew the lid off what was happening in towns like Rotherham. All of them faced slurs and slander. All of them were accused of racism or Islamophobia. All of them, if anything, underestimated the scale of the problem. This week, we received another report into grooming. This one focused on Oldham and included the extraordinary revelation that one grooming ringleader, Shabir Ahmed, had been given a council job advising people how to claim benefits, a job he got after his arrest for sexually abusing youngsters. Well, once again, it's a feature of these reports that they focus on institutional failings, what social workers missed, what police officers didn't do, how the council dropped the ball. But these weren't random acts of chance. The local authority hadn't neglected to build adequate flood defences or have a plan to beat COVID. These crimes were not faceless. They were committed by perpetrators, our fellow citizens who'd hidden in plain sight, protected by political correctness. The exposure of the grooming gangs reads like a modern fable, and as such they tell a chastening story that something so malevolent should be overlooked by big taxpayer-funded organisations and only revealed by a handful of individuals who were motivated by the workings of their own conscience. It's incredibly depressing, as is the fact that many of those who denounced Anne Cryer, Maggie Oliver and Andrew Norfolk remain in positions of authority. For those people who put their trust in the big institutions to, let me do the quotes for you, learn lessons or whatever platitudes they want to wrap their failures in, consider this. Many of the young girls preyed on by grooming gangs are in care. The number of children in care in England is on track now to hit almost 100,000 by 2025, an increase of more than a third within just a decade. Who, if anyone, will turn to be their guardian angel? Tim Montgomery is alongside me, who I'm sure has thought, if not written, a lot about this subject over the years. Do I speak rightly or wrongly?
That was a very powerful monologue, Colin, and a very sad that it needs to be said. I was at the Times when Andrew Norfolk was writing some of his stories, and the paper got an awful lot of legal battery. They tried to silence him, and it took a powerful editor. John Witherow was the editor of the Times, still the editor of the Times. He took some brave decisions to get those stories published. But still today, just on a different level, some of your viewers who follow American politics will know that Kamala Harris, the black vice president, is not the best vice president we perhaps have ever seen in American history. I know a very senior BBC journalist who's wanted to talk about this and have been told, we're not sure that's a good idea because it might look racist.
Wow.
Just commenting on the fact that a vice president is underperformed. Now, and this ethos, which doesn't matter particularly if the vice president of the United States isn't getting coverage in Britain, but this ethos that somehow, if people of a different skin colour are involved, there has to be an extra sensitivity or an extra censorship. Sometimes the victims of that political correctness are very young, very vulnerable children, and the consequences go on throughout their lives. So we need an awful lot more of the kind of journalism you just expressed, particularly in the investigations part of journalism, than we have at the moment.
OK. Tim, thanks very much indeed. Time for our debate today. The question this hour, the Prime Minister has suggested that trade unions are harming sometimes the very people they claim to be helping. At a Cabinet meeting earlier, Boris Johnson said without modernisation to the rail industry, train operators risked going bust and passengers faced ever-increasing prices that could lead to them abandoning rail travel. Almost 50,000 members of the RMT union are said to be on strike today in a dispute over pay and working conditions. So we're asking, are trades unions a force for good? Still got the former advisor to Boris Johnson, Tim Montgomery. And we're also joined now by Spike Magazine's chief political writer, Brendan O'Neill. Brendan, welcome to you. I think we're all three going to agree that, it's a fundamental human right for workers to gather together and refuse employers the fruits of their labour if they so choose. Does sometimes that become a kind of force that can be overused and misused, in your view?
I think, if anything, it's been underused over the past few decades. That the number of days lost to strikes has gone down enormously since the 1970s. So there are fewer strikes than there were in the past. But I think the RMT is absolutely right to strike today and in coming days too, because, these are people who are standing up for their pay, their right to be paid in accordance with inflation. They're standing up for job security and they're standing up for their pensions. And the inconvenience, we all regret the inconvenience that has been caused by these strikes. Of course, the RMT does itself as well. But it's precisely the level of inconvenience that is being caused, which shows how central these workers are to the smooth functioning of society. And when you are that central to the smooth functioning of society, you should be rewarded well, you should feel secure in your job, and you should feel like a respected member of the workforce. So the inconvenience being caused is proof of how important these workers are and how much respect they deserve.
I've got a feeling you take the view that the inconvenience, when the rail industry is not as essential as it once was because of Zoom and Skype and obviously, the car's an alternative as well, means that they might be cutting their nose off to spite their face.
Well, absolutely. Certainly, I think rail workers are about to find out that they don't have the same stranglehold on the economy that they once did. But I also worry that this sort of action is self-defeating. The cost of living crisis is clearly a very real thing. I was talking to a local Tesco manager the other day, and they were noting, how the kind of person shoplifting has gone from young teens stealing cider to young mums stealing chicken and mince, because just to feed their kids. So we all know, I hope, that, and I'm not trying to deny the pressure that family budgets are under. But what we also know is that when you react to a temporary inflation problem by asking for inflation-beating wages, you get into an inflation spiral that benefits no one in the end. And so while I can understand why workers are wanting to strike, I'm disappointed that union leaders of the left, and people like Brendan, who I normally agree with, actually what we should be looking for is long-term compensation for workers from recent difficulties, not short-term wage demands, which is going to turn a temporary spike in inflation potentially to a long-term inflation problem, and then we'll be stuck in this problem as we were in the 1970s for an extended period of time.
Brendan, is it going to become a political row that some Labour MPs have taken to the picket lines? How could they do any other?
I think they should go to the picket lines. The clue is in the name. The Labour Party was founded to represent the interests of Labour, which it hasn't been doing for a very long time, by the way. I'm quite struck by the fact that radical leftists around the Labour Party now support the working classes when they want to take back control, but they didn't support working class voters who wanted to take back control in the referendum 6 years ago. I think that's very, very interesting as an indication of when we support working class people and when we don't. But, just listening to Tim there, I agree with some of his points, but this discussion makes me uncomfortable for the following reason. Most of the people on strike today earn, on average, around £30,000 or £31,000 a year. That is, I would say, I don't want to be presumptuous, I would say that's less than us three earn. And here we are having a discussion about whether they have the right to take action to ensure that they can carry on earning that wage. That makes me uncomfortable. And when you look at the political class, and Boris Johnson, for example, saying that these people are causing harm by not allowing others to get to work. This is a man who, in the first lockdown, prevented people by law from going to work for 3 months. And he wants to get on his high horse about rail workers who are hampering people's ability to get to work for 3 days. The political class work from home in their digital luxury pads. Some of them still are. I don't think we should take lectures from them about whether working class people should take action to defend pretty modest wages.
Just on a point of clarification, the question that we put is, are trades unions a force for good? My opening gambit was to say, we three certainly don't feel for a second that nobody hasn't got a right to strike. Clearly, of course they've got a right to strike. But Brendan, you raise an important point, I think, about who's affected by this, who's fit to commentate on it. I mean, I take the view, and I think you do too, that everybody can comment on whatever they like. Whether we're somehow rendered less reliable witnesses to it because we earn a certain amount of money, I don't know. Tim, what I do know, because you pointed out already, is that the people who are on the buses today are not the highly networked, highly credentialed, and yes, Brendan's got a point, relatively highly paid people like us. It's the cleaners, etc., etc.
Yeah, absolutely. And I take Brendan's point that a lot of the people who are striking earn less than probably all three of us. But all of us also, I think, know that the people who are most inconvenienced by this strike earn even less than the people who are striking. They are cleaners. They are people who have no choice but turn up to work. I'm lucky I've got friends in London who've been able to put me up in their basement, and it's very comfortable. Lots of people aren't, as well connected. I know someone who's going to have to fork out an extra £100. They live, just about an hour outside of London. That extra £100 they're going to have to fork out in order to get into London for work that is essential will probably mean real squeeze on the family budget for the whole of the next month. That £100 for them means a lot. So we can, all trade, very real sob stories about the people, the lower end of the income spectrum are suffering from this. And I think the key issue is, does this actually protect workers or not? I think because of the impact this is going to have on the rail industry, because of the inflation spiral it could kick off, this is not a good strike.
We've got to leave it there. Tim, Brendan, thanks so much for your time. Appreciate it. More of your views coming in, as you'd expect. It's something that's got many of you going and animated. Robert says, unions help people who aren't good at their job and don't deserve a pay rise. Never been a union member. I don't need somebody taking my money to shore up my job security. I'll stick to my ability to do my job well. Ian says, MPs have had a pay increase. Why are the executives of National Rail paid so much more than the ordinary workers? Michael, if anyone incurs extra costs for travelling to work, they should be given a refund by the RMT union, and Edward says union bosses are the only ones who will not lose out. They don't care about the commuters who just want to do an honest day's work. Time for 5 to 5 as we discuss 5 things that you might want to know before 5 o'clock today. At 5, I wonder what Brendan would have made of this. I wonder what Tim makes of it. Rolls-Royce will give more than 14,000 staff a one-off cash payment of £2,000 to help them cope with the cost of living. The payment from the aero engine maker will mainly benefit staff at its Derby and Bristol sites and around 3,000 junior managers. 4, Hollywood star Ben Stiller has told the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky that he's his hero on a visit to Ukraine. The actor, who's a long-term goodwill ambassador for the UN, met Mr Zelensky yesterday. The 56-year-old also seen walking amongst bombed-out buildings in the city of Irpin, where Russian forces have bombed residential buildings. At 3, the Duke of Cambridge celebrating his 40th birthday today and will celebrate privately with family. Kensington Palace issuing photographs of Prince William to mark the occasion during his time selling The Big Issue in London. Back in 2009, he slept out Prince William on the streets of London with the then chief executive of Centrepoint to help understand the experience of homelessness. At 2, tourists enjoying the sea in the city of Vigo. Is it Vigo or Vigo, Tim, you know?
I don't, I'm afraid, no.
Yeah, Vigo or Vigo.
Sorry about that.
Find themselves with a fine of over £600 if they're found to be taking a pee. Beachgoers caught short while swimming could, I think the operative word is could, receive a fine of £645 for urinating in the water. The authorities passed legislation becoming the first city to do so. I wonder if they're going to be the last city to do so too. And at 1, more than 6,000 people gathered to watch the sunrise at Stonehenge for the summer solstice earlier this morning. It's the first time since the pandemic and lockdown that the stone circles in Salisbury and Avebury have been open to the public for the event. Druids and pagans joined together to mark the longest day of the year at the ancient site. 5 things you might want to know about before 5. Here's Tim, who, like me, lives close to Stonehenge. We won't say how close, and we're both of the view that all those many tourists who go to visit the stones sometimes are left disappointed. It's going to be a...
We're going to be in trouble in a minute with the Wiltshire Tourist Authority, but what I would say, in fact, is just as Stonehenge, I think, is one of the most underwhelming places to visit, Salisbury Cathedral, and it's close, is one of the most beautiful places. So do come to Salisbury, but come for the cathedral rather than for Stonehenge.
What about Rolls-Royce giving £2,000?
I think I'm going to go and apply for a job there. I'm actually more interested in this peeing in the sea story. I wonder how the authorities are going to police it. Well, how do they know when you've peed in the sea?
You remember when you were a kid, you go to the swimming pool and they say if you pee in the swimming pool, there's a dye.
That's right, yeah.
I always thought that was made up. Yeah. Probably made up. We've got 30 seconds just in terms of the rail story. Where does it go in coming days, do you think? Is it just one of those attritional things where both sides are competing with each other for the oxygen of sympathy?
I think it will partly depend on how other unions react, actually. I think there'll be lots of public sector unions judging public reaction to this strike. If I think that encourages other unions to start getting into strike action, I think that will tip the whole public balance generally. Because if we face a summer of real widespread action, when families have already got enough going on, I think the mood will change against the unions quite quickly.
Well, we'll see, won't we, Tim? Thanks very much indeed. Much more news coming up with Live at 5. Do stay with us.
Hello again, I'm Aidan McGivern from the Met Office. It's turned into a sunny day across southern parts of the UK with cloudier conditions further north. And aside from a few showers, most places are dry. That's because a very large anticyclone is sitting in the mid-Atlantic. It's blocking any considerable areas of low pressure or weather fronts from coming our way. But a weak front has introduced some cloud to Scotland, Northern Ireland and Northern England, 1 or 2 showers as well. However, even here, the cloud will tend to thin and break overnight, especially for Northern England, southern and eastern Scotland, some clear spells developing. Further south, widely clear spells across the rest of England as well as Wales, but despite the clear skies, temperatures not dropping far. 13 or 14 Celsius in places. 11 for Stornoway, where it will be a damp and breezy start to the day on Wednesday, with thicker cloud affecting the north and northwest of Scotland once again, along with a keen breeze. But although it will be cloudy for Northern Ireland, the skies will brighten by the afternoon, and a much sunnier day for eastern Scotland, for much of northern England as well, and temperatures respond as a result up into the mid-20s here. whilst 26 to 28 is possible further south for much of central and southern England, as well as South Wales. Now, through Wednesday evening, we'll see clear spells remain for the vast majority, but again, some thicker cloud for western and northern Scotland, some outbreaks of light rain and drizzle here. Northern Ireland also largely cloudy, but it's a warm night in places, a muggy night for some. 16 Celsius for Southampton, London, and I think mid-teens for Scotland and Northern Ireland. Now, for Scotland, once again, western areas seeing the cloud and those outbreaks of light rain during Thursday. But further south, plenty of sunshine before some heavy showers start to emerge in the far south by the afternoon. Showers develop more widely on Friday, along with much cooler air.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV,
on radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you. And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here. You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Defence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, in that the left fights the right and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was in fact a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah.
We're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Defence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hi there and welcome to Brazier. Coming up live at 5, empty railway stations, passengers stranded and picket lines across the country. Britain is facing the brunt of the biggest rail strike in 30 years. Millions of commuters were left unable to catch a train. Just 20% of services running after staff walked out in a dispute over pay and working conditions. But with the government unable to come to an agreement with the RMT, is there a solution to the looming chaos? The former director of Network Rail in the North, Anna Jane Hunter, will join me in a few moments. And a recruitment drive with a difference. The new advert from the Metropolitan Police, fit for a movie or major TV drama. The force hopes the slick ad will help attract 4,000 new recruits. Is it the right approach? Former Scotland Yard detective Peter Blexley will share his analysis. With me for the next hour, the former advisor to Boris Johnson, Tim Montgomery. But first, the latest news headlines with Bethany.
Thanks, Colin. Good afternoon. It's 1 minute past 5. I'm Bethany Elsey, here to get you up to date on GB News. Travel chaos for passengers across the UK as rail unions hold the largest strike action in nearly 3 decades. With 80% of train services cancelled, Boris Johnson warned commuters they must stay the course in the face of what he's calling unnecessary aggravation. More walkouts are planned for Thursday and Saturday, but the knock-on effects will be felt all week. It's after last-minute talks failed to resolve a dispute between unions and rail bosses over paid jobs and conditions.
We need the union barons to sit down with Network Rail and the train companies and get on with it. And we need, I'm afraid, everybody, and I say this to the country as a whole, we need to get ready to stay the course.
The RMT Union General Secretary described today's turnout as fantastic and said it exceeded expectations. Mick Lynch also said the union members will continue the campaign until their demands are met.
This is a lawful dispute under the legislation that the Tories brought in themselves. And every time we meet the hurdles and break the thresholds that they brought in, they want to change the law again. We've got the most draconian laws in Western Europe and in any democracy, in fact. Anti-trade union laws. Whatever they bring in, we'll meet that challenge and we'll continue to campaign, and if necessary, we'll take effective industrial action when we need to.
Well, people who need to travel today say they've been struggling with alternatives.
It's taken me the best part of 3 hours using 4 buses and a little bit of walking.
I haven't been able to get any trains to work. I've been on buses since about 6:30. They keep cancelling. Keep driving past, it's impossible to get on them, they're all so packed. I've only literally just gotten to work now.
I want to use buses, but the queues for the buses are just way too much, yeah.
Unions have reacted with fury over a leaked memo which suggests Labour has banned its frontbenchers from picket lines. The head of the TSSA union described it as ridiculous nonsense by a party that was created by trade unions. Well, Labour has declined to comment, although some MPs have joined demonstrations, including Scottish Labour leader Anna Sarwar, who met with workers striking in Edinburgh. Meanwhile, Royal Mail says it will ballot more than 115,000 of its workers over potential industrial action. The Communication Workers Union is demanding an inflation-based pay increase. The union described the 2% pay offer as totally inadequate. Ballot papers will be sent out to members next week and the results will be released next month. In other news, a man who murdered a couple in their home while their children slept upstairs has been jailed for life with a minimum term of 38 years. Stephen and Jennifer Chappell were both stabbed 6 times in November last year in Norton Fitzwarren near Taunton. Colin Reeves, who served in Afghanistan, launched the attack after a long-running dispute over parking. He killed the couple using a ceremonial dagger which was given to him when he left the army. Around 100 firefighters are tackling a blaze at a high-rise block of flats in Manor Park in East London. London Fire Brigade says a flat on the 13th floor of the 15-storey tower block is alight. Around 60 people left the building before crew arrived. The cause of the fire isn't yet known. Meanwhile, in West London, a fire at a residential high-rise building in Shepherd's Bush is thought to have been started by someone charging an electric scooter in their flat. The blaze is now under control, but one person had to be taken to hospital with smoke inhalation. 30 residents were evacuated from the building. And crowds have returned to Stonehenge to mark the summer solstice for the first time in 2 years. The sun rose over the stones at around 10 to 5 this morning, and it won't set until almost 9:30 this evening, giving more than 16.5 hours of daylight. The summer solstice has been celebrated at Stonehenge for thousands of years, with the stones framing the sun as it rises. This is GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens now. Let's get back to Colin.
Well, Britain's rail networks pretty much ground to a halt today, didn't they, as workers walked out in the first of 3 days of planned strike action this week. Up to 50,000 members of the National Union of Rail, Maritime and Transport Workers, the RMT, they walked out demanding an 11% pay rise after those last-ditch talks failed yesterday afternoon. Disruption being felt across England, Wales and Scotland, just 20% of services seemingly running. It's causing problems for passengers trying to get around the country today.
On buses since about 6:30. They keep cancelling, keep driving past. It's impossible to get on them. They're all so packed. I've only literally just gotten to work now.
Well, there's also a political row rumbling too. The Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, demanded that his front bench colleagues backbench colleagues too, don't join the picket lines. Not every Labour MP followed his advice. Kate Osborne, the MP for Jarrow, for instance, and an aide to Keir Starmer's frontbench team, posted her support on Twitter. GB News' Home and Security editor Mark White has been following the strikes throughout the day.
At one of London's busiest train stations, it was anything but today. A largely empty concourse at Waterloo, indeed at stations right across the capital, as the vast majority of commuters clearly got the message that 80% of rail services are suspended.
It took me half an hour longer than normal. Right. I had to go via Norwood and then back into London Bridge.
I get it, especially after COVID. Like there needs to be some job increases. There needs to be maybe a bit of a pay rise, but if everyone's working from home, there's no real impact. Like I said, my train wasn't busy. We just got stuck outside.
At Birmingham New Street, passenger numbers there were a fraction of what would normally be seen on a weekday. This train to Northampton, one of a vastly reduced timetable of services to some key locations. In Scotland and Wales, the disruption has been even more severe. ScotRail say there are no services outside the central belt and only a handful of trains on the normally packed commuter services.
It actually works out a bit better, the times they've put on today, but it's very frustrating, the train strikes.
I was meant to be, I was going to go and work in the office. I still could, but I'll be honest, I'm just going to go and work from home instead of working in the office.
At Cabinet, the Prime Minister warned the public they must be prepared for more disruption.
We need to get ready to stay the course, because these reforms, these improvements in the way we run our railways are in the interest of the travelling public.
At Edinburgh's Waverley Station, the Scottish Labour leader Anna Sarwar defied Keir Starmer's edict that Labour politicians should not be seen with strikers on the picket line. Union bosses said the strike action was lawful and warned of further disruption.
We've got the most draconian laws in Western Europe and in any democracy, in fact, anti-trade union laws. Whatever they bring in, we'll meet that challenge and we'll continue to campaign, and if necessary, we'll take effective industrial action when we need to.
The Shadow Chief Secretary to the Treasury has urged the government to play a more active role in trying to bring about an end to the dispute.
If ministers simply stand back and say this is the wedge issue of the week, this is the issue upon which we can divide the country this week instead of something else, that is a lack of responsibility, it's a dereliction of duty, and we need better than that from the government.
Although many people opted to work from home today, others took to the roads for their daily commute. The M1 in County Durham, one of the routes busier than normal. With a tube strike in the capital adding to the misery, London buses have been busier than normal. The frustration obvious among those who weren't able to get on board. Large numbers of commuters, like me, opted for a taxi to work, although cab fares have been increased. With good weather forecast across the week, many others have taken the bike to work. The government says it's actively planning to change employment laws to allow for the likes of agency workers to step in future disputes. But that won't help with this current set of strikes, which are expected to cause travel chaos across the entire week. Mark White, GB News.
Let's turn to the travel expert and CEO of the PC agency, Paul Charles. Paul Charles, very good afternoon to you. One thing I haven't got a sense of today, I'm not sure you will have, I'm not sure we'll even find it possible to arrive at a sense of it until tomorrow, is how many employees have taken strike action, whether it is pretty comprehensive, whether fewer of them have taken strike action than we might have expected. Any sense?
It's difficult to tell, and of course the union will say we've got popular support, our picket lines are strong, we've got MPs appearing on picket lines, as you just reported, but it's very hard to tell what that turnout is. One thing we do know for sure is that those workers will be feeling the pain in their pockets for each day they take strike action. And if they take all 3 days over the next week, then they're going to be seriously out of pocket. And I think you've got a battle here between the government, which is clearly hardening its approach based on the Prime Minister's comments about staying the course, and the unions whose members will be saying, well, we might be able to afford a couple of days out, but when it gets to 3 days or more, we're starting to feel the pain of losing our wages. And that's the battle that will now start taking place.
And Paul, from your position, who looks at the travel network and how they all fit together, does it tell us another story about how railways, which once were absolutely integral to the successful and effective functioning of this island that we live on, the power the unions have to stop that system working is less than it once was?
Well, I think the COVID pandemic has actually changed everything, Colin. We've seen people now working from home much more, including many civil servants, of course, who are involved in policy making by government in the transport industry. And they're deciding, well, it doesn't really matter if train workers go on strike anymore because I'm sitting here doing a Zoom call or a Teams call or whatever it might be. And so it's having less punch and less impact. And that's why I think this is going to be very interesting where this now goes. And I do think we'll see a hardening on both sides. I don't believe we're going to see the two sides, although they are due to meet again tomorrow, and that's expected. I don't believe we're going to see these two sides really get much luck in terms of a compromise over the coming days. They're hardening because on the one side, you've got the Prime Minister who is sending a clear message to the rest of British business about not increasing wages too far during an inflationary period. And on the other, you've got the unions who are under pressure from their own members who are saying, well, can we try and get a deal because we need the money during a cost of living crisis, but equally we need to show how powerful we are. And there are so many issues now from both sides on the position they're going to take that I don't see compromise in the air.
Paul Charles, appreciate your thoughts as ever. Thanks very much indeed. Tim Montgomery alongside me. How does Keir Starmer play this?
Well, he's not playing it well so far, I don't think. I can understand why he doesn't want to offend either the unions or travelling public. But the problem for him is it feeds into this growing narrative that he's really sat on the fence on most issues, that he hasn't really got any policies to benefit from the obvious disappointment with this Conservative government. And there's, we're talking off air, Colin, there's a cartoon in today's Times by the brilliant Morton Morland, and you've got Keir Starmer looking like he's a protester saying, what do we want? And the placard he's holding is actually just a blank piece of paper. And this idea that he doesn't really stand for anything is going to, I'm afraid, be reinforced by this sort of on the one hand and on the other hand position that he's taken yet again on this issue.
Tim, for now, thanks very much indeed. Well, joining me is Anna Jane Hunter, former director of North of England Rail at Network Rail. Anna, thanks for your time. Appreciate it. I mean, if you were still within that railway family, how would you be feeling right now? I mean, it's, the paralysis of our railway network is not complete, and if the strike action drags on for days, weeks, months, would you expect more and more at the moment striking workers to start to trickle back to work?
Well, I like to think I am still part of the railway family, albeit not in the role that I used to be. So I still very much work in the industry. And I think we all feel really disappointed that it's come to this. We've avoided strike action on almost every occasion, over the course of my career in the rail industry. And it is disappointing that we've ended up here. I think your previous commentator was right that it'll be interesting to see how many days of strike action workers are willing to bear and the union are willing to support off the back of what's been a couple of years of no overtime for these same workers who want a pay rise. But there's a lot of different issues wrapped up in this, and it's not just one type of worker or one type of terms and conditions involved in this. It's extremely complex, and so will be the solution.
Anna Jane, did you grow frustrated with the unions? I mean, we were talking to an expert yesterday who was listing some of the reforms that seemed pretty obvious, really, making use of new technology that actually would, for instance, improve the safety of railway workers, but they were still resistant to change.
Look, we typically have a really good relationship with the unions in the rail industry. The relationship is extremely close. It's hand in glove, and it needs to be because the unions have a really important role to play in things like safety. Has modernisation always been as quick as we all would have liked it to have been in the industry? I think no, it probably hasn't been. But I wouldn't attribute that all to the unions. I think there's as many people within, the management team who are not fully committed to the change agenda as there have been union reps over the years, over the decades. So we've ended up here. After a long journey, this hasn't happened quickly. So the unions have played their part. So has the team on the other side of the table, and likewise, that's the only way of resolving this is for both sides to compromise and to find some middle ground.
It was mooted at the weekend that one way of solving it, and clearly not a total solution, but maybe part of a solution, and it would be hugely controversial, and some say not even safe, would be to use more agency workers. I was struck this morning listening to Grant Shapps on BBC Radio. He was asked about this, and he said, look, it's not, when we talk about agency workers, we're not talking about bringing in a whole bunch of new people. Sometimes you're simply tasking people in the same office to move from that terminal to that terminal and do a different job.
I'd like to see the detail of what he's describing. I've heard his comments too, and frankly, on the face of it, I just don't see how it would work. The vast majority of railway workers and a lot of those we're talking about here in this strike action are highly trained professionals who've taken, in some cases, long amounts of months and years to train in the skills that they have. And then once they've acquired that competency, it then takes regular upkeep. And so much of that is safety critical, and you would want it to be. You want the railway to be safe. Don't get me wrong, there are areas where you can, bring contingent labour in, I suppose, but it's not going to be the amount of labour that would break a strike. I just don't see how that would work.
Anna-Jane Hunter, really appreciate you.
Nice idea, but
but not necessarily workable. Anna-Jane Hunter, really appreciate your time. Thanks very much indeed. Let me just turn for a final thought on this subject from Tim Montgomery. I just wonder, Tim, it's beginning to dawn on me that if the government was looking to pick a fight with one of the big unions, to set an example, pour encourage les autres, to say, as they say, to say, look, we are not going to stand for big public sector pay deals, or because actually then we get this wage price spiral thing going on. If this had been teachers, heavens above it, if it had been NHS workers, the paralysis that would have threatened, there's no way, the government would have had to cave. I just wonder whether with railway workers, there would be enough people looking at the union saying, actually, we can do without you. I see the government's position. You see where I'm going with this?
Absolutely, yeah. Well, I think the union movement was more coordinated than perhaps it is, they would have definitely started with the nurses, for example, making a demand, as you say, imply. And, of course, if the nurses had then set a precedent, it would have been much easier for everyone else to follow them. Actually, the rail workers going first was probably not strategically or tactically a good idea. I don't think the government have helped themselves, though, today by agreeing to restore the triple lock for pensioners. Pensioners deserve being looked after, but when you're saying we can't afford pay rises for public sector workers and you agree to possibly a 10-11% rise in pensions, you are undermining your own case a bit.
But we are going to talk about this in a wee while because, you know the way this business works. Some days stories leak out, limp out, and you think, whoa, that's an enormous story. An extra £10 billion a year has just been added today in a almost hidden announcement to the House of Commons by the Chief Secretary of the Treasury to make sure that those state pensions are now locked into, inflation. The rate is set in September. I'm just looking at one email from a viewer who's outraged at me not being sympathetic to what the government had done. The usual, I've paid in all my life. But it's a lot of money.
Yeah, look, we all have granddad, or we're pensioners ourselves. Pensioners deserve to be looked after. Of course they do. But the average pensioner now is better off than the average worker. So to give them even more money on top of what they already have doesn't seem fair. A year or two of restraint, as we're asking upon everyone else, seems to be wise. But, of course, why is the government doing it? Could be an early election. Pensioners vote Conservative and the government doesn't want to upset them. Wow. It's politics, I'm afraid.
Tim, thanks very much indeed. Coming up, the Metropolitan Police has released a line of duty-style TV ad to encourage new recruits into the force. It's been criticised by some for depicting an unrealistic representation of life in the force that more closely resembles Hollywood than being a bobby on the beat. I'll speak to former Met Police officer Peter Blexley next.
Hello again, I'm Aidan McGivern from the Met Office. It's turned into a sunny day across southern parts of the UK with cloudier conditions further north. And aside from a few showers, most places are dry. That's because a very large anticyclone is sitting in the mid-Atlantic. It's blocking any considerable areas of low pressure or weather fronts from coming our way. But a weak front has introduced some cloud to Scotland, Northern Ireland and Northern England, 1 or 2 showers as well. However, even here the cloud will tend to thin and break overnight, especially for Northern England, southern and eastern Scotland, some clear spells developing. Further south, widely clear spells across the rest of England as well as Wales, but despite the clear skies, temperatures not dropping far. 13 or 14 Celsius in places. 11 for Stornoway, where it will be a damp and breezy start to the day on Wednesday, with thicker cloud affecting the north and northwest of Scotland once again, along with a keen breeze. But although it will be cloudy for Northern Ireland, the skies will brighten by the afternoon, and a much sunnier day for eastern Scotland, for much of northern England as well, and temperatures respond as a result up into the mid-20s here, whilst 26 to 28 is possible further south for much of central and southern England as well as South Wales. Now, through Wednesday evening, we'll see clear spells remain for the vast majority, but again, some thicker cloud for western and northern Scotland, some outbreaks of light rain and drizzle here. Northern Ireland also largely cloudy, but it's a warm night in places, a muggy night for some. 16 Celsius for Southampton, London, and I think mid-teens for Scotland and Northern Ireland. Now, for Scotland, once again, western areas seeing the cloud and those outbreaks of light rain during Thursday. But further south, plenty of sunshine before some heavy showers start to emerge in the far south by the afternoon. Showers develop more widely on Friday, along with much cooler air.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV, on radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices.
With honest and civilised conversation.
We're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, in that the left fights the right and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was in fact a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah.
We're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Well, I won't say there's only one story in town today because we are covering more than just the rail strike, but it's pretty clear what's exercising your thoughts. Colin says, brilliant show. I'm sick and tired of hearing London, London, London. The average wage in Sheffield is far lower than in London. Many in London haven't a clue about how hard it is up north. I think that's in reference to something Tim Montgomery said a few moments ago. Mark says, I don't believe it. I always agree with Brendan O'Neill. Yes, this is in connection, actually, with the conversation we had about the trades unions. Brendan O'Neill, who was on your show earlier, but I believe he's wrong on this strike action. Sure, if the economy has strength after the pandemic and the war, then strikes are fine. But right now, they run the risk of crippling our country further and damaging themselves in the process. Mike says, where were the RMT when all these rail jobs were under threat due to lockdown? Paddy says this is Boris Johnson's Thatcher moment. He'll beat the unions or the unions will beat him. Could be right. Leslie says there's a reason for these strikes. Yes, people are suffering because of them, but people who work on the railways are also suffering from having such low wages. Keep them coming in. The Metropolitan Police has released a new TV advertisement as the force looks to recruit 4,000 new officers.
I've just seen someone abandon their car and run off.
That looks quite concerning.
Choose a career most people only see on screen. Search Met Police Careers.
Well, the Force says the 30-second long advertisement's been designed to closely mirror the hit show Line of Duty and even features popular phrases from the programme. Let's get some reaction from the former Scotland Yard detective, Peter Blexley. Peter Blexley, welcome to you. It's you know, pretty glitzy. Is it real?
Yes, it's very sharp and very glossy and eye-catching. But, of course, it doesn't show a lot of the reality of policing, particularly the policing that new recruits will generally do. It doesn't show officers being assaulted in the numbers that they are. It doesn't show an officer waiting in an A&E department for most of their shift as they look after somebody who's having a mental health crisis. And I could go on with many, many other examples that are far less glamorous than we saw in the advert.
The Met or the people running this advertising campaign would counter by saying, well, look, there are lots of jobs that advertise themselves in a pretty glamorous way that's not really borne out by the humdrum reality of the job. But if you're looking to get new people through the door and there is a demographic dip right now and young people are being sought after and contested by different would-be employers, you've got to make it look attractive.
Oh, I entirely see that point of view. And the Met Police are having a recruitment crisis, to be perfectly frank. Well, more of a retention crisis because officers are joining. They're not fully prepared and aware of some of the horrors that face them on an almost daily basis. And they're saying enough is enough when they've only got a very short amount of service in. I think what the advert does is shows some of the diversity of roles that can be done within policing, and there are countless different types of jobs, many of them hugely satisfying. And if it attracts the right people into joining the Metropolitan Police and considering joining other police services around the country, then that's got to be a good thing, because as much as the 20,000 figure that Boris Johnson spoke about, many people are trying to hit, sadly, so many are leaving after a short space of time.
Peter, when you've come across new recruits, are the ones who are full of high principle the ones who tend to stick it out? I mean, the people that you meet, you know, the new recruit who says, I'm a police officer because I want to make the streets safer or I want to make Britain a more just place. Are they the ones, does high principle mean they tend to stick around?
I went to a passing out parade of Hertfordshire police officers just 2 or 3 weeks ago, and I was really struck by the camaraderie that they'd already got amongst them after, I think it was 23 weeks of training, and the fact that they were just itching to get out on the streets and do the job. They seemed to me to be very principled young people who wanted to get out there to keep their communities safe, to do the right thing. I hope that they don't get bogged down with doing other public services job for them, particularly mental health workers, because so much policing is taken up with that these days. And I hope that they can have a satisfying and long career in policing when they pursue whatever role that is that they want to do, because it remains a truly great job.
It'd be interesting to see, wouldn't it, Peter, how many of that cohort you saw in Hertfordshire are still doing the job in a year's time. As you say, for you, it's a truly great job. I think most of our viewers and listeners will agree it's an absolutely essential job and probably under-recognised by many of us, because these are the people who have to deal with the worst crises that we'd rather contract out to other people. But if you had to sell it in a paragraph to somebody who's maybe thinking like that, maybe just finished A-levels, and would quite likes the idea, how would you sell it to them?
Policing is a job like no other. Every day you will make a difference to people's lives, most likely when they are in their darkest hour.
Thanks very much indeed for your time, as ever. Tim Montgomery is alongside me. Brief thought, Tim.
A friend of mine, actually during lockdown, became a special constable for the bit, and he's found it incredibly rewarding. And it's part of his job he now does alongside his main employment. But his big takeaway from it was what a high proportion of time the police now spend dealing with domestic violence. What he does really with his time is often going into flats and homes where usually male violence against women just seems to have really taken off during the lockdown period. And the police really are in the front line of that. It's rewarding work in that you really are protecting vulnerable people, but it's very tough, very tough.
Tim, thanks very much. Coming up, we'll be asking, should the government reinstate the pension triple lock? It's said today that it will, and the cost, £10 billion in extra spending or borrowing. We'll have to decide, won't we, where the money's coming from. It will put retirees, state retirees, that is, in line for near £1,000 extra for their annual income. Is it fiscally responsible? We'll discuss that after the latest news headlines with Beth.
Thanks, Alistair. Good afternoon. It's 5:34. I'm Bethany Elsey in the GB newsroom. Major travel disruption for passengers across the UK as rail unions hold the largest strike action in nearly 3 decades. With 80% of train services cancelled, Boris Johnson warned commuters they must stay the course in the face of what he's calling unnecessary aggravation. More walkouts are planned for Thursday and Saturday, but the knock-on effects will be felt all week. It's after last-minute talks failed to resolve the dispute between unions and rail bosses over pay, jobs and conditions.
We need the union barons to sit down with Network Rail and the train companies and get on with it. And we need, I'm afraid, everybody, and I say this to the country as a whole, we need to get ready to stay the course.
The RMT Union General Secretary described today's turnout as fantastic and said it exceeded expectations. Mick Lynch also said the union members will continue the campaign until their demands are met. Around 100 firefighters are tackling a blaze at a high-rise block of flats in Manor Park in East London. London Fire Brigade says a flat on the 13th floor of the 15-storey tower block is alight. Around 60 people left the building before crew arrived. The cause of the fire is not yet known. And the average annual grocery bill could jump by £380 this year as food price inflation hits a 13-year high. The latest data from Kantar says that's an increase of more than £100 since April. Shoppers could be spending £32 more every month in the supermarket. On TV, online and DAB plus radio, this is GB News. We'll get back to Colin in just a second.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
Here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound is 1.227 to the dollar. The pound is 1.164 to the euro. And the price of gold currently stands at £1,495.15 per ounce.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News, investments that matter.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV,
on radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
we embrace all voices.
with honest and civilised conversation.
We're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, in that the left fights the right and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was in fact a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah.
We're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Time for our debate this hour. The Treasury has announced that it will reinstate the triple lock pension policy next year. It was an announcement which sort of dribbled out today from the Chief Financial Secretary to the Treasury. The announcement will put state pension retirees in line for close to £1,000 more in their annual income from 2023. It's after the Chancellor Rishi Sunak, you'll remember, but maybe you won't, temporarily froze the triple lock during the COVID pandemic to save some money. It does mean that state pensions will rise with whatever is highest, inflation, pay growth, or 2.5% year on year, where you can forget the 2.5%. So if it's inflation, and this is set in September, you're looking at 10, 11% more in state pensions over that next financial year. But with inflation expected to hit double figures later this year, it could mean the government spending an extra £10 billion on state pensions. And there are those arguing the policy is not a responsible use of public finances at this time. We're asking, should the government reinstate the pension triple lock? It's that simple a question. We're joined by the pension expert and head of public affairs at the Lang Cat, Tom McPhail, who's going to argue the toss with this one with Tim Montgomery, who's alongside me in the studio. Tom McPhail, welcome to you. This is a lot of money, and we'll get into the politics of it with Tim, which isn't really your area, but for it to dribble out like this, such a major announcement, goodness me.
Well, it's not uncommon for the government to do that. I agree with you. It would have been great if they'd focused a bit more attention on it. And given this is an important message for the sort of 12.5 million people over state pension age, I think they could have made more of it. Maybe they're feeling a little self-conscious having had to suspend the triple lock previously, as you mentioned in your intro. So perhaps they don't want to draw too much attention to it. But I think it's a really important development, not least because so many pensioners rely so heavily on the state pension for their income, particularly single pensioners. It's a really big chunk of their retirement income. So what the government does with the state pension, with the triple lock, really, really matters.
Yeah, Tim Montgomery, it really matters, and we know that inflation erodes savings if some of these state pension retirees have much.
Well, look, I think every viewer of this programme will want to protect pensioners from the worst effects of inflation, of course. It's very hard, though, for the government on a day that it's saying we can't afford inflation beating or inflation matching pay increase for rail workers and nurses to then give exactly that to pensioners. The reason why the government says it's denying them to average workers is because it's dangerous setting off an inflationary cycle. That's the same with pensioners. I think if the government insists on helping pensioners for understandable reasons, why not target that money on the most needy pensioners, or perhaps give them a one-off, cash boost, not because the one we were talking about Rolls-Royce giving to their workers earlier, but a one-off boost to help them through this crisis, but doesn't then become into the pension, which then increases the pension cost year after year, which has to be borne by average workers who, compared to recent British history, now earn less than the average pensioner. So there's an issue of justice between workers and pensioners here too, which means I'm worried about today's news.
Tom, when you look at the annual state pension bill, £110 billion, I mean, it's a huge proportion of the welfare state, and given that, the idea of a one-off payment, as Tim suggests, becomes, you can see it would be politically attractive. I'm not suggesting it's going to happen, I'm just saying you can see the sense of it.
Well, Tim makes a really good point. I think there's a couple of things to throw into the mix there. One is, of course, pensioners only have two sources of income, whatever they've saved themselves in their investments and their pensions, and the state. Whereas, of course, workers, people who are still earning money, also have the income that they're generating year after year into the future. So they have an additional source of income which is denied to pensioners. But I think the other thing to keep in mind is the kind of top-up payments the government already uses. So we've had a variety of tools that they've deployed, top-ups to the pension credit, top-ups to people's energy bill payments, top-ups to winter fuel payment. These all help, but they're not very effective. And a key problem that the government already has with the pension credit, which is specifically designed to target money at the poorer pensioners, is that a lot of that money doesn't reach the poorer pensioners. It's a really inefficient mechanism for putting money in pensioners' pockets. And there's the best part of a couple of £1 billion a year that's going to waste, some 850,000 pensioners that aren't getting the money that they should already. So whilst I agree with Tim, you're talking about using a solution that already doesn't work very well. The other thing to keep in mind is that whilst pensioners have done pretty well in the last 10 years, they weren't doing well before that. And if you look ahead to what's coming for pensioners, the decline in private pension incomes means that any problems we already see for pensioners are already set to get quite a lot worse over the next 10 to 20 years.
Tim Montgomery, one thing you see from the emails that are flooding in is that justice question. You get the refrain, the endless refrain, we've paid in all our lives. And people understand that, don't they? But what people understand rather less is that, yes, you may have paid in and you may feel you're due to take something out. The government ultimately decides what you get to take out. And actually, not just the government. When you've got inflation eroding £100 by £10 a year in inflation, it's not just the government's. It's not just in the government's gift.
No, and of course, people are right when the basis on which national insurance and other things are solved is that you do pay in and you receive later on in life. But actually, the government didn't put this money aside, to pay now. It was spent at the time. The reality is that pensioners are being funded by existing workers. And existing workers, unlike pensioners, have seen their real wages, particularly in blue-collar groups of workers, fall year after year in inflation terms. That isn't true of pensioners. What I think we need is a much bigger adjustment of how, for example, we tax income. I think we could tax assets more, where there's been an awful lot of increased wealth, some amongst older voters, but generally amongst better off people, and tax income less. It's those sorts of big adjustments in how we run the economy that will probably really get to grips with the intergenerational and other fairness issues we're discussing.
Tim Montgomery and Tom McPhail, thanks both very much indeed. Just a flavour of some of those emails that we were discussing.
I'm not doing very well, Colin, you said amongst
apparently. Let's find out. Dave says, I'm a pensioner and vote Conservative. This return to the triple lock is totally unnecessary. The country is experiencing a cost of living crisis. I live in sheltered housing accommodation. Pensioners should experience the pain of the country and not be made a special case. No specific mention there for Tim, but hang on, it's early days yet. Clive says, if we pensioners are that well off, why has my wife still got to go to work at the age of 67? We don't want to end up with bills we cannot afford to pay and go towards being in poverty. David says, pensioners are not better off than the average worker. Although I'm not a pensioner, it is the pensioners that after the war and 50s, 60s and 70s brought this country back into the top 5 wealthiest nations. Tim Montgomery, I'll just give you a final word on that. You weren't named specifically, but any of those points catch your ear that you want to address?
Well, look, of course we want to honour pensioners, and of course what's also true is that pensioners may receive money directly from the state and I think the Institute of Fiscal Studies does absolutely say now the average pensioner is better off than the average worker, but I'm sure there'll be other people who dispute that. But of course, we also need to recognise I've benefited from, myself, and I hope I give myself as well. Pensioners do help their, younger relatives, and vice versa, etc. So we do need to allow a certain freedom for the generations to help themselves as well. This isn't all about what the state does, but of course, the poorest people are often the people without that extended family network to help them.
Tim, thanks very much. Now, the Chief Sustainability Officer at NHS England says cutting back on face-to-face GP and hospital appointments will cut emissions and help the NHS achieve its goal of becoming net zero. Dr Nick Watts says switching to remote consultations saved 276 kilotons of carbon in England last year, but GP appointments via phone or video link raising fears elderly people won't be able to access the service. Not just elderly people. So, is it worth the eco-benefit if there is a downside for patients? We're joined by Richard Tice, leader of Reform UK. Hi to you, Richard. I've heard lots of arguments for using Zoom to have a consultation with a GP. I've not had the environmental argument advanced as one reason we ought to be going down that road.
Good afternoon, Colin. I think this is absolutely unbelievable. I mean, if you take the Chief Sustainability Officer's his argument to its logical conclusion, we might as well get rid of ambulances, Colin. After all, let people suffer and die at home, and then you don't use fossil fuels. You don't have emissions put out. I mean, what does this person think they're on? The whole single purpose of the NHS is to reduce suffering and to cure patients. And that means almost by and large, to get patients either into GP appointments or possibly into clinics, into hospitals, fast, efficiently, so that they can be seen and helped. And frankly, I think the very first thing that should happen is this man or woman should be fired. The NHS doesn't need a chief sustainability officer. What it needs to do is to get its waiting list down with a resolute sole purpose and nothing else.
Well, I have to confess, Richard, I hadn't read this introduction. And when I got to those words, help the NHS achieve its goal of becoming net zero, I think I, like you, was slightly bamboozled. I thought the chief goal of the NHS was keeping us all alive.
The goal of the NHS is basically to reduce pain, to reduce suffering, to keep people healthy, and to cure people. And frankly, it's got nothing to do with net zero. And I think someone needs to tell this individual and whatever people he's got with him the facts of life. I mean, I think it's utterly, utterly shocking. And if that's how they're wasting their time and their resources and their efforts and energy, it's not surprising we've got 6 million plus million people on waiting lists heading north fast towards 10 million. It's not surprising people can't get to see GPs.
Richard Tice, as ever, appreciate your time. Thanks very much indeed. Tim Montgomery, just a brief thought on this one. We can't necessarily, Richard wanted to see this individual fired for pursuing this objective. They've been set the objective, they're just doing their job.
Well, look, I remember the Yes Minister sketch. You might remember, Colin. Do you remember when Sir Humphrey Appleby was talking about this wonderful hospital that the staff were happy, it wasn't running over budget, etc. And then we just realised at the end of the sketch it hadn't actually opened yet. It wasn't actually even seeing patients. But no, patients first. Of course, we have to hit environmental objectives. But if you're not really caring for patients in the proper way, I had a few anxiety issues over the last few years. I met a GP face-to-face. He could see in my body language in a way that he wouldn't have seen on Zoom exactly how I needed to be
We were
helped.
having this conversation yesterday in the context of booking offices, ticket offices on the railways, which some people want to close altogether, so we're all using apps. And I just think we're in danger of taking human interaction out of so many encounters that are actually really quite good for people. A story for another time. Now, the Duke of Cambridge turns 40 today. And the future heir to the throne is continuing to use his status to highlight causes that he cares about. Our royal reporter Cameron Walker has this report.
Conservationist, father and future king. Prince William is Britain's most popular royal after his grandmother, the Queen. For an ancient institution with a motto of never complain, never explain. The Duke of Cambridge has been a pioneer in modernising the monarchy he will one day lead. Ian Pelham-Turner was one of the first photographers to take official pictures of the baby William in 1982. Royal rules dictated he only had minutes to capture the perfect shot and wasn't allowed to speak to parents Charles and Diana. The Princess of Wales was unaware her son's teething ring was blocking her face.
I made a noise like I was dying. And Diana turned round and she knew I was breaking protocol, but I wasn't, because I wasn't actually speaking. As she moved the teething ring, William went to grab the teething ring, and in 1/60th of a second, that really made my career. I've been living off that picture for the past 40-odd years since.
The Duke of Cambridge has a long-standing passion for protecting wildlife, and one of his first royal patronages in 2005 was the conservation charity Tusk. Before the charity's existence, up to 100,000 elephants a year were killed by poachers in the illegal ivory trade. Charles Mayhew, MBE, is Tusk's co-founder and CEO. He's worked closely with Prince William and has travelled to Africa with him to help protect wildlife.
From the moment he became patron, we saw a significant rise in our revenue, but much more importantly than that, his ability to promote the work not only of Tusk but actually the wider conservation movement, and using his patronage of Tusk as a means to do that and to get some very sort of powerful messages across.
William is the future of the monarchy, but the future of the planet worries him. His new global prize for the environment was launched, the most ambitious and prestigious of its kind, designed to find 50 solutions to repair our planet over the next 10 years.
It's a hugely ambitious target, but I do think the positivity and that finding ways through this is better than saying, you know, it's all doom and gloom, we're all going to, you know, perish. I think we've got to harness our ingenuity and our ability to invent.
The prince's passion perhaps stems from his grandfather and father's work over the decades. Having a family of his own gives him the opportunity to inspire the next generation to look after the planet. But the Duke's main duty is supporting the Queen, and her mobility issues means William represents her at more engagements. Good practice for a monarch of the 21st century. Cameron Walker, GB News.
Prince William, 40, goodness me. Michelle Dewberry with some thoughts on what's coming up on her show. Michelle.
Hello, Colin. Yes, of course, strikes today. I want to ask people whether or not they've actually been impacted by this, or have they just been chilling out in the sun at home. Also, you might have seen criticism for Grant Shapps. Apparently, he's not been involved enough in the talks. He says calling for that is just basically, it's just a bit of a ploy. Keir Starmer on the other side, he's warned his front benchers not to get on the picket lines. Some of them, Colin, have totally disregarded it and done it anyway. So I want to look at all of that. Also, celebrities going to war zones. Is that what we need in a time of crises? And your criminal record. How much should your criminal past affect your future, in particular, when it comes to your employment opportunities? And last but not least, over in Japan, Colin, they've got a new initiative to encourage people to write love letters to each other. Apparently, that is the future, not dating apps.
You know, I often listen to your story choices and think, wish we'd done that. Ben Stiller going to Ukraine, it was scratching at the back of my head, and you're doing the story. Well done, you. Michelle, thanks very much indeed. Just time for a couple of emails on the train strikes, inevitably. Willow says, the strikes are the government's fault. I feel that if the government actually went to the negotiating table, there wouldn't be so much of a problem. Abe says, strikes are never the answer. Every union that strikes is inept and has failed in their attempts to negotiate. Tim Montgomery, can you sum up 10 seconds, rail strikes, where from here?
I think it will be how the public react now, whether actually they've been able to adjust to this new post-lockdown working from home environment. If it's happened on the scale that it looks like it has, the strikes will fail.
We'll see. More news coming up. Michelle's next. Stand by.
Hello again, I'm Aidan McGivern from the Met Office. It's turned into a sunny day across southern parts of the UK with cloudier conditions further north. And aside from a few showers, most places are dry. That's because a very large anticyclone is sitting in the mid-Atlantic. It's blocking any considerable areas of low pressure or weather fronts from coming our way. But a weak front has introduced some cloud to Scotland, Northern Ireland and Northern England, 1 or 2 showers as well. However, even here the cloud will tend to thin and break overnight, especially for Northern England, southern and eastern Scotland, some clear spells developing. Further south,